It is my pleasure to introduce Payal Langani from Bank of America. Thank you so much, Payal, for your support of this event. We're so excited to hold this and share Geeta's wonderful journey and story with the community. And I would love to hand it over to you to share a little bit more about yourself and the work that you do to help entrepreneurs grow.
Good evening, everyone. It's my pleasure to welcome you to today's programming. My name is Payal Langani, and I serve as a business banker at Bank of America. In my role, I lead a team of experts to help growing companies succeed. Though I invite you to think of me as your resource within Bank of America for any financial need that you may have, whether it be for an individual, a company, or an institutional need. Think of me as your internal resource. As a corporate sponsor, we are very proud to work with TiE Boston, which focuses on supporting entrepreneurs throughout their life cycle. I'm also particularly thrilled to partner with TiE Boston on this event featuring the legendary Gita Iyer and the world of impact she represents.
Okay, so Geeta, let's get started. I'm not going to do a very long introduction because we did send out Geeta's bio, and quite honestly, if I start talking about all of Geeta's accomplishments, I don't think we'll ever get to the talk. Yes, the list is that long. So by way of introduction, what I will say is Geeta has been the first person, at least I know, and many of us here at TiE Boston know, who has followed ESG as her investing principles long before the term ESG was coined. And the reason why we called today's event as doing good and doing well is because there's always this myth out there that if you want to do good for the world, you can do it, but it's probably not possible to also make money and run a profitable business. But Geeta has proved time and again that that is a myth. She has definitely broken the myth many times. So with that introduction, Geeta, I'm going to ask you to tell us a little bit about your professional journey. I know you started out in the civil services, the IAS in India. You ran a side business, selling Indian spices here in Boston. And, the journey just goes on. So give us like a quick, overview of this journey to how you got here.
Thank you, Anu. Thank you, TiE Boston. Thank you, Payal. I think it's a pleasure for me to speak to you this evening and to talk to all of you. And hopefully we'll get to have a Q&A as well. So let me see if I can collapse a number of years into a quick summary. I did start out, as you pointed out, Anu, in India, in the Indian Administrative Service. I worked in Maharashtra, and then I came here to go to graduate school at Harvard Business School. And that's when my journey in finance began after that. Along the way, I, was a consultant for a short while, but more importantly, became a financial analyst. I got the CFA designation. I came up the ranks as an analyst and a junior portfolio manager. So pretty traditional financial background. The curry paste is just it's funny that you know about it, but there's a way in which every little segment is interlinked to the others. And so I took leave from IAS, came to Harvard Business School. From here, I went to consulting. From there, I went to investments. Along the way, I guess the way I discovered entrepreneurship and the fact that I had it in me is through this curry paste business, where I created a line called Instant India, along with a partner who wasn't very involved after the initial phase. But we created, probably like ESG investing, I was probably a decade or two early in that as well. I think it's just the story of my life. But we created a line of curry pastes to sell to university dining halls, to sell to Trader Joe's, to Whole Foods, a whole bunch of very interesting, exciting places. But the reason it's tied to what I did later is that it's the way it was cash flow from that business that helped me start my first sustainable investment firm. So it's all interconnected. And My current firm is Boston Common Asset Management. I founded it to be a global sustainable investment firm, not to manage other kinds, but really only to focus on this, to kind of pursue financial returns and social change. So one way to answer the question that you raised is that you embed it in your goal. And that's one way you can do both.
Okay, great. It's funny how in life, right? Everything is a stepping stone to get you to your final point. So I'm going to take you back to when you graduated from Harvard Business School. So if I'm right, I think you were the second Indian woman ever to get an MBA from Harvard Business School. Is that
That's
right? Yeah.
Yes.
So, practically the world was your oyster. I mean, you could have chosen any profession that you wanted, whether it was here or in India. But you went in, I believe, into consulting and then became a financial analyst. Any reason why you picked that particular point after business school?
Two reasons. One is actually I didn't have many options. If you think of yourself as just fresh off the boat from India to Harvard Business School, in 1980s, right? I was class of 85, so I started in 1983. I should have brought before and after pictures. There was me from the district in a handloom sari, and that's exactly how I came to school. So I didn't have enough cultural context to be in marketing or HR or OB, what we used to call organizational behavior. I wasn't an engineer, so I wasn't going to go into production. Finance, on the other hand, was very accessible because it was you required math, and I had comfort with that, and I just got really lucky. At every stage, I got really lucky. I worked with a consulting firm that did work with endowments and foundations, so I felt very at home in that, because while it wasn't exactly like working for government in India or public service, it was not your big multinational corporation environment. And then from there I went into investment management, which was what I've since done. I think I found my calling through that. Yeah.
And that path you chose, right? I mean, what you just spoke about, finding your calling and going into finance, you went into a very non-traditional finance path. Yes, it was still investments, but first of all, for a woman to be in that field in those days, that itself was something that was not the norm. But to pick ESG, which was not even a term there. So, just for our audience quickly, ESG stands for environment, social, and governance. So Gita's philosophy has always been to do right by the environment, make sure that what you are doing is enabling social justice and has the right governance. So this was not a term, and it was not something popular in finance in those days. But you still, obviously, I mean, you have had a very successful career picking ESG, and you've had a couple of successful exits also. So what is your secret? How did you manage to do it in a field that, that was so difficult?
So you're right that I was unusual no matter where I went. So it was, in modern terminology, the first person of color at my consulting firm. I was the first, probably the first in the analyst and portfolio management front of the office side, even at the trust department and bank that I worked as an analyst. So I was lucky enough to encounter students who were building shanty towns and demanding South Africa divestment. This was an issue that our endowment clients and foundation clients came to us with, and I got to write the research report as the lowly newest consultant. So it set a thought going in my mind. The second is that, of course, I grew up in India. Not only that, I worked in rural India with water shortages and things like that before coming here. So the idea of an inclusive prosperity was very much in me. The idea that you could bring values, or the idea that you could bring considerations into investing was first brought to me, therefore, by my clients. And I think clients, and the important lesson I would say is to hear them. Many investment advisors were in the business of saying to clients, especially when they said, hey, I was protesting the Vietnam War, I don't want to invest in weapons, or I don't, the idea was to tell them, look, just invest, make a lot of money, and write a charity check. And instead, what I was willing to do, and what I think I still to this day try to do, is hear my client and understand what they're asking for, and then figure out how I can do that for them to the best of my competence, with excellence, with thoughtfulness, and with kind of a commitment to achieving their goals. So at every step, as I say, there's luck, and then there's what you will take from the environment that you're presented with. So when I started out, the challenge was, can you manage a portfolio without all these names? Very soon, it became apparent to me that there were things we could seek to invest in. There were things we could invest in that would be better, and then there were questions I could ask as an analyst that would change things. So the second part of what I set out to do became this engagement piece. I was an analyst. I had proposed a stock. We owned it in our portfolios. It was a supermarket company called Albertsons. One of their competitors, Lucky Stores, had been hit with $100 million class action lawsuit verdict by a court for not allowing women to become managers. And these women had somehow gathered together, and it took a very long time for the courts to come to this verdict, but it was a landmark verdict. It was a lot of money. So it was, this is the early 90s, so, $100 million. And I called the company management and I asked Albertsons management, what are you doing to prevent our company from being sued? Because we own stock in this company. Mm-hmm. They flew all the way to Boston from Idaho to meet with me to talk about what they were going to do. And I realized my power, that I had unique reach, the ability to ask a question that is actually ultimately a financial question, but grounded in what one might call today an ESG issue of discrimination, of not giving opportunity, of not allowing women to be promoted to managers in supermarkets, for crying out loud. It's like, why not, right? So, so I never looked back, and I felt that I had touched something that would allow me to have a platform and a reach that would allow shareholders, my clients, to ask those questions. And I was lucky enough again to have some nuns as my clients in the early days, and they were my biggest boosters. So they would say, why not, right? Why should there be women on boards of directors? Not because it's the right thing to do, but because the board's going to get better by having women. And yeah, you sometimes have to affirm to yourself the things that you're not able to see. And so I think I just took one step in front of the next, and it became very much my style of investing. And I never wanted to. And so when I started my first firm, it was really to not retrofit, to do both kinds, which seemed somehow inconsistent, to pick the best opportunity set for these clients and to build it grounded on the idea that you could actually invest in these. And to put it in financial terms, environmental effluence, emissions, discrimination, low wages, whatever, all of these are really unpriced externalities, right? So which society allows companies to not count as their costs. And so it became a framework. I was able to develop a little bit of a philosophy around it. And it's been so much fun. I tell you, I go to work with purpose. We were able, we draw young people to us who want to invest in this way. And yeah, I just got really, every step, though a struggle, was very, very intrinsically rewarding. And I think you have to know, what are you here to do, right? So.
Yeah, I think, the important message for me, and I think for our audience there is what you said, reaffirm what you may not be able to see, but what you believe in. Very important for everyone, particularly for people of color and for women, because we might not see others who look like us, but if we believe in it, we have to keep reaffirming to ourselves. So Geeta, I read some really interesting examples of how you used, this investment power, so to speak, in bringing about social change. The Albertsons was one example, but getting Washington Redskins to change their name and,
Yeah.
making sure that private prisons are not found. We can go on and on, but are there like one or two examples that you can share with our audience today?
Yeah, and I thought it would be most fun to just do like a phrase or two about each so
Yes.
that, yeah, because
Yes.
then you can cover a lot. So
Yeah, sure.
there used to be carpets sold with child labor in the supply chain. So the idea was that there was an NGO called Rugmark that would put a seal saying not made, they would certify made without child labor. So we engaged retailers to carry those and to sell those, because merely creating the product isn't enough. We engaged Marriott on an issue as unusual as child sex trafficking. Believe it or not, in Southeast Asian destinations and around the world, their hotels are often used for child sex trafficking. And Marriott, the founding family, was pretty religious and very values driven. So when we reached out, they said, "Oh my God, like what can we do?" And the idea was as simple as rewriting their training manuals to teach their employees, who are trained to focus on confidentiality and look away, and instead to look at, because just by making those few changes, they could reach a bigger, different place. Another, a totally different set of examples would be engaging with banks on under their loans to private prisons or to gun manufacturers or to coal, underwriting coal. And we had engaged actually a large number of the world's largest banks to look at, to take account of. So this is encouraging for accountability and transparency, and ultimately using it as a way to improve their own loan book, because the risks of regulation, the risks of consumer preference changing were very real. And so we wanted to bring that to the attention of banks. And I look at it that we can change or have a dialogue with a company on what they make, that is products, how they make it, process, and how they run their company, that is policies. So non-discrimination on a number of issues, or how are they distinguishing themselves in today's day and age. Actually, it's come such a long way. It's no longer about don't do this. It's really what can I do to be better, right? We end up sharing best practice with companies, because we are often in dialogue with a large number of companies within an industry, and so we can create that. So it's actually over time, it's gained in legitimacy and has become possible to, it's become possible to aspire to more, much more. We are really not telling them anything that they don't already know. They are building their brands. They are building loyalty among their own employees. And they know that, so we look at our job as empowering the progressive forces within companies that allow the managements to take these steps. So we shareholders can give them the ability to be long-term in their investment decisions, in their management decisions. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
the fact that you've done all this and either meet or beat the S&P 500 just proves that it can be done.
yeah, in all, I mean, we are global investors, so in each category, our own, whatever the benchmarks may be. And I actually think that what I've discovered over time is that consumers get it, companies get it. Actually, finance is the last to get it. The conservatism is in the orthodox training of finance that doesn't let us reward companies for being long-term oriented and to take a leadership role in this. So a lot of times, really the value add that we do, we work with very powerful NGOs in a coalition. They know the domain areas. We can't possibly know all of that. What we really bring is the ability to speak that truth in finance, in the language of finance, and in the language of investments, and to legitimize and become that institutional pillar that investors are. that would support such a transition. And I think that's to me has been the biggest aha moment, is that the idea that we are really on the same side as managements. We want stock in the company. We want the company to prosper, right, and we want the company to do well. So we're not here in a zero-sum relationship. And I think often that's what makes that change possible.
Yeah, and Geeta, with this whole COVID thing, right? Unfortunately, the ones most impacted are, either minorities or low-income families. Most probably, they're the ones who are going to default on loans. Maybe they're going to lose their houses. So it's a time when everyone has to come together, like policymakers, large corporations, banks, investment firms, and the NGOs that have the power.
Yep.
Everyone has to come together to make sure that this does not happen. So what are your thoughts on this?
There's a whole host of issues raised by COVID, from supply chain issues where, suddenly there was a stop and everybody who has made the product, how do they get paid? Or employees who, couldn't come to work safely, could not come to work because they were needed or were essential services. It's just raised so many weak links in our way of thinking. It's even brought the internet issues to the forefront, where digital human rights have become important. So almost in every vertical that we work, or every aspect, how you conduct yourself has become important. And one of the issues, obviously, with this year of racial reckoning that's come to the forefront, is the issue of just how damaging to wealth creation, wealth building, and long-term sustainability and inclusion, the practices around discrimination, however, is really structural and systemic, and has to be addressed as such. So we've done a fair amount of work with regard to diversity, equity, and inclusion at the firms in terms of who they employ. That goes for LGBTQ rights, that goes for women, that goes for racial diversity. Obviously, we also have looked at boards. I mentioned earlier that the nuns thought women should be on boards, and I think we've said diverse people should be on boards, because the point is that you have critical mass and you hear different perspectives. So giving a person a seat at the table is important, but giving them a chance to speak and to be heard is when you get the real benefit of what that inclusion did. I think it's another little side to be aware of, that companies are all also part of a value chain. So I mentioned earlier how we went to retailers and said, why aren't you? Today we are talking to Lowe's and a number of retailers on the chemical toxicity of the products that they are selling. Why not add an organic option or a high quality option? In the same way, we've gone and talked with banks with regard to the lending, to the underwriting, to insurance companies, because inequality and kind of the inability to build wealth is embedded in very ordinary processes and practices. It seems very, normal to be looking at a FICO score, a credit score, your cash collateral. But when you stop and think that in the Boston area, the Federal Reserve Survey shows that non-immigrant Black families have a net worth of $8. So if you see that, you know that it comes into play in so many aspects. Actually, having wealth gives you better relationships with police, better relationship in the healthcare system, better relationship in, so it creates the opportunity to have a setback in life, a loss of health, a failure in business, a loss of a job. I mean, it doesn't bring your world to an end because you have some resources and resilience. So our focus, therefore, is on how to create that second chance capability, that resilience. Because so in addition to advocating for and tallying and measuring, so one of the tools that we've come to appreciate is measuring non-conventional things, right? So when you want people to take both and into account, and you only measure them on one, then they're not going to take the other one into account. So the idea, this is why, it is unpriced externalities, but like, can you, one of my, theories of change is that you need engaged shareholders, you need good data on which companies would feel legitimately that they could be compared, because they are competitive people. So once you have that in place, then you create an ecosystem in which there is a way to calibrate, reward better actors, share best practice. So they will create a race to the top instead of the usual race to the bottom that we financial professionals end up rewarding. Investors just end up rewarding, saying means don't matter, create a race to the bottom, take the shortcut, make the quarterly earnings happen. So we are really enabling something that will allow a set of processes to continue, because they are getting even more ambitious than we ever thought they could be. And I think that's the sort of systemic change. Then at the personal level, I think there's a lot that we can do. I would say that as Boston-based entrepreneurs and my fellow, um, you know, uh, travelers on a journey towards having an impact to our beloved city, I think we should do something in the area of homelessness. Someday, let's chat about that. What do we owe our city for the good fortune and beautiful place that it is in the cold of winter to have people with no home? It just, something's wrong there.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Actually, Geeta, that was going to be my next question is what message do you have for entrepreneurs and just our audience today as people who care about social justice and equality? And I think you gave that message. Do you want to add anything? If not, I'm going to start taking questions from the audience.
I think every entrepreneur today knows that having a culture of purpose and having a sort of a proposition for why you exist. And it's not a new idea. Actually, a very old book called In Search of Excellence said that the excellent companies all existed not to meet quarterly earnings, but for a lofty purpose, to solve a problem that existed. So that's one. And then the second is that solution of a problem ought to be also grounded in your clients or your customers. And to me, that those two combined is why this is in business and not in the NGO world. I'm going to stop and let you ask questions. Thank you.
Okay. So let's actually go to questions online. Jenna, can you tell us if there are questions queued up already?
Absolutely. So we do have a few questions that have come in. So Geeta, first, do you think that your early background in public service is what helped you to understand the importance of socially responsible investing, something that wasn't necessarily typical of the corporate time?
I think you could be right. Yes, because something was missing in the whole quest to merely make a bigger bonus every year than the prior year. And I felt that work had so much more meaning when I was doing public service. And something was missing in that. And so, yes, I may have resonated with this question more quickly than others might have. Because as I said, the conventional wisdom was, write a big charity check with the wealth that I can make for you. And the idea that means matter was something that I resonated very quickly with me. Yeah. That said, I want to say one more thing, which is that it isn't for charity that we are doing this. I mean, if you stop and think about it, and I don't want to sound like manipulative, but as a long-term investor in a company, and that's what an equity owner is. There is no due date for equities. It's not like debt, and there's no exit strategy in public equities like private investments or investment, or venture capital. So if you are solving society's problems, environmental or social, you gain consumer loyalty and pricing power. If you realize that people are your assets and not just a cost to be managed and controlled, then you actually unleash the very source of competitive advantage. I mean, ultimately, look around us. There aren't too many lasting competitive advantages, and people are the imaginative, source of imagination and good execution, even a retailer has to realize that it's the people that make the difference. And so I think that you, and then ultimately, if you're avoiding unexpected risks that you haven't anticipated because of poor governance, then you expose yourself to a very substantial, substantial challenge that could. In financial terms, that's the top line, the bottom line, and the discount rate. So I'm not doing it out of only one part of my brain, so to speak. It's actually from both. Those two are intertwined in terms of making the case to companies why they should. And they actually know what they have to do. Like I said, we just have to give them permission to do it.
Great. And along those lines, another question came in that what's the trade-off, the balance for, say, if a company is making a really big impact on one particular issue, but for example, their board isn't diverse or they're lacking in another area, how do you approach that?
Yeah, that's actually a very good question. So we spend a lot of time thinking about what are fatal flaws, like, what I can't change over time, right? So I don't waste my time telling Philip Morris to get out of tobacco or ExxonMobil to get out of oil or something like this. So what we are looking for is companies that are making, desirable, high quality, safe products, which when used as intended, don't cause harm. And then we may look to see if they have a pattern of violations or, egregious practices, on discrimination or on pollution or on bribery and ethical challenges and so on, corporate culture issues. If it's a pattern and have they learned from it? Have they done something? And then ultimately you're looking to see which issues can be engaged and improved. I will say that obviously these critical issues will change depending on the particular industry you're looking at. So I mentioned retailing earlier. I think S is the most critical in a retailer because it's people and that is actually the place where so many companies take shortcuts, pay below minimum wage, make people gig workers, create precarious work, all intended to make bottom line be bigger, but not necessarily building the sustainable advantage of motivated employees who actually don't look stressed and are not checking how to collect welfare payments, while still on the job. Because part of the culture of our country has become, we used to say externalities are pollution, where companies would emit effluents or emissions, but a lot of social costs are actually externalized, so S is critical. So it's important to look at which industry you're looking at, and it's clear that environment would be very important in industrials or in materials companies and so on. Yeah.
Great, thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
So we have a few questions looking back and then also towards the future. So first, starting backwards, what was the most unexpected macro shock that affected ESG over the last decade?
I wasn't a big fan of their work initially, the 350.org people who said divest fossil fuels. But like the students who built shanty towns for South Africa, they brought this issue, an issue of climate change, to the boardrooms and to the investment committees of almost every organization. So climate change is a systemic risk. It is something that even with my active portfolio, which I avoid holding many names, we cannot escape because it affects everyone. And that's why it's called a systemic risk. I would call inequality without mobility another systemic risk because it's basically, torn society's fabric apart and has created so many upheavals around the world. So by bringing the issue, forcing the issue to the discussion table, and highlighting what we all knew, that the timeline is short and that action now is worth a lot in comparison to perfect solutions later. And so doing whatever we can right away was important. And to ask why not, and is it because it's our future, not yours? that really, I think, escalated issues. And so I would say 350.org and the student movements in this space on climate.
Thank you. And taking it a bit more personal, what challenges have you had to overcome in this space? And what keeps you motivated to continue to work against those challenges?
So some come from who I am. I'm short, I'm an immigrant, I'm a female, there's things I can't change, but there they are, right? And they might weigh on you in a way. And for many years, I tried to, not let anyone see who I am and very much adapt and try to fit in. I try to be very good at my work, and that is very important. But I think the day you realize that these are not your shortcomings, but really your secret weapons, that's the day that you start to thrive in this. So some of them are, I think 1.3% of all assets in the US are managed by firms led by women or minorities. I mean, so, there's that, you can be, I've tried always to navigate that intelligently. For years, I always took, no offense, but a tall white guy with me to kind of counterbalance. So with me to every finals presentation. And it de-risked the proposition of investing with me for my clients. You can get angry about it or you can get creative about it. And I think so there are barriers to entry. ESG there was always somebody on a committee that might say, don't do this, it's really bad for your financial health, it shouldn't be done, can't be done, write big charity checks, like I said. And what I realize is that over time, that has turned to a place where what we are doing has become the goal, even for those skeptics to adopt. So I feel very blessed that, sometimes you could be left, I mean, history may look back and say you were just those wild and woolly, crazy people, or that spun out of control and were just that, or you became the vanguard of a movement. And to look back and see, and we used to say in idealism in the early days that we were there to change finance, and that wasn't that was what we were there to change, rather than accommodating a client's request. It was something bigger than that. And I mean, touch wood, but I think we are at a tipping point of that sort. And so I feel very, very lucky to have reached there.
Wonderful.
And I think the world is better off for it as well.
Thank you. And so again, going towards the future now, what do you think is the next big thing in the space? And also, what do you hope for yourself coming up?
I think we are scaling up quickly, and it will be important to continue to ratchet up our ability to act and to not do the least we need to in order to be for entry into the club, so to speak, or to not, and so I think to all of us, we ought to listen to our kids. That's the way I look at it, and hear the urgency in their voice, the clarity with which they see things. And I think it's that sort of transformation. Let's look at it as a project to become young again, and to see things more clearly, and to see things with the idea of why not. And I think too often we take things as constraints that don't need to be. And to be honest, if you look at finance itself, I am endlessly optimistic because I think we just optimized to the wrong things. We didn't know any better. We optimized to the cost of capital and the availability of credit and things like this, when the really scarce resources were air and water and earth. And so we didn't count those, and we counted everything else. But it means that we have incredible, adaptability and creativity. These are rules we made. And so we alone can rewrite them. And it takes only the rewriting by a few. And that to me is the most encouraging thing, is that these textbooks, they were not written that long ago. They were written 40, 50 years ago. It's not, I used to joke and say you didn't come down from the mount with tablets that said these are the rules of finance, right? These were just written by people around a table. So we can change this. So to continue to be in the moving the vanguard forward, but bringing everyone along, because we have to build a big tent. We have a planet to solve and people to include in our prosperity. And so we don't have time. And so one of the things to do is to not be, perfectionist and judgmental and say, you're not good enough or you're not doing everything perfect. You just kind of build a movement and take everyone along while still urging ambition towards better. So our role will be to put those more ambitious issues on the table, to bring them into the proxy ballot. I think that in the US, shareholders have the ability to raise issues, and if they're not resolved, can bring them into the proxy ballot and get a vote by shareholders. So creating consumer awareness or investor awareness to demand that those you invest with rise to that challenge. You're not here ultimately to decarbonize a portfolio. You're here to decarbonize a world, a planet. And that's the important change that we seek. And I think sometimes we think, I've put my money in something that doesn't do any harm. That's very important. Don't get me wrong. First, do no harm is very important. But there is more that we can do. And to consistently raise that is, I think, the goal.
Thank you. And so, there's a question here about why isn't everyone doing this, right? What's holding people back? Why aren't there more women investing in biotech and pharma? Why isn't everyone invested in this? And so what are some of the challenges that you've seen that are some of those barriers to everyone being involved?
Right. One is that it is happening. So I want to say that there is hope, and then we can talk about how we can make it faster and more prevalent. It is happening. The US, I think now is about 30% of assets have some sort of sustainability guideline, which the Social Investment Forum counts this every couple of years. And so it's better than it used to be, but it means that 70 cents on the dollar are not being invested in this way. Probably Europe is the other way around, 70-30 the other way. So I do see a runway, a path by which we can get there. And I think that that will happen. It's no longer kind of this edgy, wild, crazy thing. So this is going to improve. I've been advocating to teach sustainability in as part of finance. Why learn finance and then unlearn it to learn sustainability, or create something called sustainable finance that's a ghetto somewhere as an elective or an afterthought, which says this is the real finance. Oh, and let me tell you about this other thing. No, we have to embed it in the middle, and I think same with the chartered financial analyst coursework. I think that analysts should be taught, again, how to embed this and include this, so we can build it right from the get-go. And I think other things that we can do to increase the participation of women, the role, etc., is obviously we will all be one day volunteers that sit on boards. I hope you all will. Don't shy away and don't be afraid to be the only person asking the annoying question of why not give this person a chance. It does seem very risky. I can tell you that, if we didn't perform well in any given year, there was probably a whole bunch of people who gave me a chance thinking, oh, is it because of this peculiar way she invests with sustainability criteria? Is it because she's a woman? Is it because they're a small firm? There's a way in which the second guessing happens automatically. So we have to lean against that and create, questions that, what if someone else underperformed once in a while? The markets were crazy, investors were irrational, all these things that enable us to give a second chance. So that we should be the people who give that second chance and ask, about it. And I think the other thing I always think is, people call it broadly mentoring, but I think reaching across generations is helpful in terms of mentoring. It's helpful to get mentored, not necessarily by someone who's exactly like you, although that's very helpful also, but the of any kind. And so there is a lot of learning on how to uh, navigate that can be shared. So the reason I was excited when TiE Boston asked me to do this is because I know that this is what you do. You enable people to walk a path that is difficult. If women and people of color are not getting funded and they have entrepreneurial ideas and their venture funding isn't flowing to them, that's a market inefficiency as opposed to something's wrong with this. So I feel that that kind of reframing is within all our power to do. And you are doing that and creating the skills and creating the why not culture, which I think is critical. Um, it's critical to keep even our society and our economy dynamic, to constantly revisit. Because once we think we have the perfect recipe and we never need to learn, I think it's over, right? As far as I think that kind of questioning is very critical. Sorry to be long-winded, but I just I'm excited to be talking to all of you. You've done so much.
We're so thrilled to have you here and for your insight and inspiration. Most of the comments here are saying, thank you for sharing your story and your inspiration. And we're so glad to have you as a part of the TiE community. And so
let's do this. Let's take maybe one more question, and I want to give Geeta like a few minutes in the end just to wrap up. So let's do 1 or 2 questions more, okay?
Yeah. So I'll kind of form a big question then, Geeta, which is, how do you tread some of these issues, whether it be in the boardroom with political issues versus making investors uncomfortable, whether it's questions of massive growth and greenwashing or lessening impact? How do you manage this balance between comfortability and knowing that you're doing the right thing or investing in the right place?
You never know for sure, right? So you make the best assessment you can at any given time. I do think that a lot of what I've ended up doing is translating, which is to say, speak finance to sustainable movement folk and speak sustainability to finance folk, or translate into financial speak the ESG issues of our time. And that capacity exists within all of us. And what I have realized is that, we came into this knowing how to see things differently. I speak for myself as an immigrant, but I think every one of us in our own experiences is a bit different from everyone else. Society puts a lot of pressure on figuring out how to find out the right answer. And that's actually not the right quest. So the way I look at it, I'm not looking for the right answer. So I can actually afford to not be successful or right in everything I choose to do. I mean, you only need to see an average baseball hitter to know that they live and die by the batting averages. And why then should we be so afraid to take a step because we may not get it perfectly and correctly? So I think once you give yourself that permission and humility, all you're trying to do is to raise that batting average. And if you are able to take into account all the information, the learnings that are inside you, you embolden your own pattern recognition, your own, people may call it intuition or whatever. So what I'm saying is, don't dismiss it as an intuition or a guess or a gut feeling or a whatever. Give it the credibility of being pattern recognition, of being experience, allowing you to see things, or hearing a negative remark, not seeing corroborating evidence, leaning away from a decision, or seeing corroborating evidence from an unexpected independent source, leaning into a direction. I feel that over time, we become better at this. And we become better because we allow ourselves to be better.
Geeta, it's been beyond inspiring. I mean, I really don't know how else to say that. And that's what a lot of the comments are saying here. Your advice, I think, is equally applicable and important for men and women. So I purposely did not want today's event to be called like a TiE women event, because I think it's a TiE Boston, and it's equally important for everyone. At TiE Boston, we see a lot of women entrepreneurs, by the way, a term that I don't really like. I mean, it reminds me of the times when there were very few women doctors and everyone used to refer to them as lady doctor, right? We are beyond that now. There are so many women doctors that you just say she's a physician or she's a doctor. So we need to reach that point where if there is an entrepreneur, she or he is an entrepreneur and not a woman entrepreneur, because there is no such term as a male entrepreneur. So I think your advice is equally applicable to everyone attending today. Just to wrap up, I'll ask you a last question, which is, what advice do you have for entrepreneurs who are still building their companies? How can they make sure to follow their true north, stay true to these principles, and build a company that has ESG sort of built into the fabric? You don't have to be an investment firm or a finance firm. Any companies, you mentioned processes, boards, etc. So what do they need to do right at the start?
At the start is to create, as I said, a kind of set of principles or objectives, why they're here to do what they're doing. So what is it they're here to do? To both say that not just in a superficial way, but really mean it and see how you can live by it. And I think also apply to every test, that those test your every action or decision against that. Set in place, incentives that are consistent with that. And the reason I say that is that a lot of times we end up delegating to people, and we want others to be walking that as well. So I definitely think embedding it in the culture is a very important part of this. Ultimately, I think we all know that the culture of the firm is what will enable us to be successful. That's the one distinguishing feature of all successful businesses, is that they have a culture that enables them to do so. So invest some in that. I know as an MBA student, I used to, kind of roll my eyes at all the organizational behavior stuff. But in life, you realize that this is actually the most important. And the one other thing I'll say to entrepreneurs is that, again, the past has only very limited use for the future. And we are actually treading forward in a journey in which there are no right answers. And that's, again, where the internal compass is important for you. And I'm in agreement. I agree with you about, I wasn't sure who was in the audience. So I was talking a little bit about my journey as an immigrant woman, but it doesn't have to be. And honestly, I feel that every one of us, I think I've sort of written and spoken about this, that we live in the hyphen no matter what we are, right? So you are creating something new, something that hasn't been done before. So you are creating something, potentially a fusion of some other things that haven't been combined in quite the way that you're combining it. Your curry paste, or your financial services, or your particular software solution. So absolutely, you are going forward with no actual known outcome. And in that, you have, I think, the obligation to both create a narrative and build resilience. I place a huge value on resilience, because that's why I was talking of batting averages and so on. Like, you're not here to hit it perfectly. You're here to improve your batting average. over time. And to me, that was the most important thing that I learned in entrepreneurship and in being, in charge of a startup, partly because, so do it a second time, you'll do it better, and I feel that there is no, how shall I say this? I was raised in a demanding Indian family where you had to get it right. You had to be first in class. You had to, all these things. And so it made me reluctant to try anything where I didn't know already that I was going to be first. And I think that can never be the luxury of an entrepreneur, because at any point you're going to turn and it's not going to be what it was. And so yeah, so my, so building that, and it sounds hokey, but share that with your team. Show them your vulnerability and your commitment to these issues. It's not something that people think of as leaders, but I think it's important because you want each of them to have that same culture and that same resilience. Does this make sense?
It makes total sense. Geeta, I want to thank you for this, spending so much time and also giving us, I think, some very actionable piece of advice which we can really do something about. And all our entrepreneurs, I hope you've taken good notes. Not just entrepreneurs, I mean, we have today in our audience really across the spectrum. We have entrepreneurs, we have some young professionals, we have folks who are part of various TiE programs. So everyone has something to take away today. The one thing that I will say, Geeta, which you said, is we just need a few people who can rewrite those books and take us in the right path. And I just feel like if those few people are like you and having leaders like you, the future is definitely looking good. And I have every confidence that we here in Boston will march towards a good, equitable place. And this will be a place of social justice. So thank you for your time today. Payal, I want to thank you and Bank of America for collaborating with us today in bringing this event to everyone. We will have many more such events. So with that, thank you all and have a good evening.
Thank you. My pleasure.